We are broadcasting live from San Diego, California, from the studios of KPBS on the campus of San Diego State University. Greetings to our distinguished participants in Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina, and the United States of America. Once again, we would like to thank Telecomunicaciones de México, PanamSat, BrasilSat, and NahuelSat for their satellite linkage services, which allow us to reach all of you directly through the wonders of telecommunications. Welcome to the program Managing Health and Productivity, New Approaches and Technologies, the 9th video conference of our 1996 series, Strategies for Global Competitiveness. My name is Armando Osorio, and I will be your moderator for this video conference. We would like to remind the coordinators at each receive site to collect the attendance sheets with your sites and mail them to the ITC along with a list of participants interested in obtaining the certificate or diploma for this series of programs. This program is composed of 2 presentation modules and 2 question and answer sessions. We look forward to your live participation. Today's program is important given that governments and business organizations have come to recognize that managing and enhancing health should become the primary focus in attaining higher levels of productivity and achievement. But the increasing problems of disease, stress, inefficiency, and violence in our community and in the workplace today confirm the fact that many traditional approaches to physical, mental, organizational, and social health have failed. This video conference will present new approaches and technologies for enhancing health and improving productivity. It will discuss innovative views for integrating environmental, organizational, and individual factors to a more flexible and less standardized health prevention and care strategy. It is a pleasure to introduce to you today's expert speakers, Mr. Daniel Hopwood and Dr. Jerry Johnson. Mr. Hopwood is a senior consultant with Marsh & McLennan and has been practicing within the occupational health and safety field for over 17 years. During that time, he has worked with hundreds of employers on their health and productivity programs, creating innovative strategies for occupational illnesses and injuries. Since 1987, Mr. Hopwood has been called upon to teach, lecture, and conduct seminars at a number of prestigious professional organizations and universities. He was the originator and is currently on the Task Committee for Occupational Health and Management Certificate Program offered by the San Diego State University, and he is the past chairman of the Surveillance Subcommittee of the American National Standards Institute on the Control of Upper Extremity, Work-Related, and Cumulative Trauma Disorders. Mr. Hopwood is a graduate of San Diego State University with a bachelor's degree in health science, emphasis in industrial safety, and a master's degree in public health from the Graduate School of Public Health. He has written and published numerous reports and technical articles on the relationship between health and productivity in the workplace, and is recognized as a practicing expert in this field. Dr. Johnson is considered one of the few international recognized non-Chinese master instructors of medical Qigong therapy. In 1987, he began his clinical training as an acupuncturist, herbalist, and Qigong therapist, receiving certification in China in 1981. He has studied at the China Beijing International Acupuncture Training Center and at the Academy of Traditional Chinese Medicine. In 1995, he attained his license as Doctor of Medical Qigong and Anmo Therapy, as well as receiving his graduate degree in Clinical Qigong Medicine from the University of Beijing. He has received his Professor of Medical Qigong Science and Philosophy degree from Beijing Western District Qigong Science and Research Institute. Dr. Johnson is currently founder and director of the International Qigong Institute, where he has designed a 4-year medical Qigong program, which is well known internationally. And he recently was named by the World Health Organization the U.S.-Canada representative for the promotion of medical Qigong. Welcome to you both. Let us begin with a couple of introductory questions. Mr. Hopwood, is it true that the way that we conduct ourselves in the workplace has become more important than the physical risks that we have traditionally focused on in our occupational health and safety programs?
The short answer to that question is yes, and thank you. I think it's a great question. What we have seen develop in the United States with a burgeoning service economy is more than 80%, if you look at most literature, of injuries and illnesses as a result of unsafe acts versus unsafe conditions. That fact will play out more and more in the rest of the world, and I think it's something that we need to pay close attention to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hopwood. It's very interesting. And now, Dr. Johnson, could you explain how is it that you came to China to study?
Traditional Chinese medicine is divided into 4 distinct branches. There's acupuncture therapy, qigong therapy, tuina or tissue regulation therapy, and qigong. These 4 branches are very prevalent and a very powerful basis for traditional Chinese medicine. They're also the root for holistic healing. All holistic modalities can be traced back to Chinese medicine. So that prompted me to go to China to study from the different masters in China.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. We would like to start now with the first module, where Mr. Hopwood will explain the realities of health and productivity in today's workplace.
In November of last year, the International Training Center presented a program which discussed strategies to improve the health and productivity of workforces. Methods to improve health care and its delivery were discussed, as were a variety of categories where positive impacts can be made on the health of working populations. Although it may seem basic, the unification of the efforts of educators, businesses, and governments were reviewed. A lack of integration amongst these 3 powerful segments of society, where improved health care and work productivity is concerned, will prove harmful to the overall efforts of the constituents individually. With concern that there will be a constant blurring of the etiology of adverse health outcomes from work and non-work related exposures, we found it essential to review the realms where such exposures existed, thus providing focus for interventions. These realms included the environment at large, social groupings, the physical and mental aspects of the workplace, and individual workers themselves. An important aspect of control was reviewed last November, that being the advantages of looking at the resolution to some of the issues we are faced with from a systems orientation as opposed to breaking them into smaller pieces and tackling those pieces individually. From a working perspective, that has some particular challenges, as we all have been taught over the years to break operations into tasks and evaluate those individually. However, advantages exist when looking at large social or work populations from a systems perspective. Of course, when referring to the health of workers, we often spoke of the value of holistic approaches, or those approaches which are alternatives from traditional medicine. As we begin our discussion today of managing health and productivity, it is essential to point out that there are 2 aspects to our presentation. The first being a review and analysis of those factors which may impact the health of our workforces, with some recommendations for remediation, or at the very least, a description of some approaches which may prove useful in managing the factors that impact our workforces. In the second portion of the International Training Center's presentation today, Dr. Jerry Johnson will detail how one form of alternative medicine can be used to improve health care and positively impact productivity. With those comments in mind, I'm reminded of a quote that I have seen from the great British statesman Winston Churchill, where he said, "The Americans are a great nation, and you can always count on them to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options." I'm certain my recollection of the quote is a bit paraphrased, but of course he was referring to America's response to the attacks in Great Britain during World War II. Churchill would have rather seen swift, decisive action as opposed to a scattered approach, which in most cases relies on luck and volume to resolve a problem. As with war, many employers do not have endless supplies of soldiers. Therefore, the best approach is usually that which is the safest and has the best chance of returning soldiers, or in your case, workers to their environments, healthy and capable of being productive. Determining the best approach in order to retain or create healthy and productive work teams is more essential today for the simple reason that the exposures which they will be facing are rapidly changing. Technology, as we know, creates both opportunities and hazards. The opportunities generally do not replace, for example, all displaced workers, but may enhance the productive capabilities of an organization. Other aspects of work where exposures to injury and illness that will manifest without controls include both chemical and non-chemical hazards. Non-chemical hazards include those which are generically stress-related, including psychosocial factors, cumulative trauma disorders, violence in the workplace, bloodborne pathogens, and factors associated with the global nature of business. Let me offer a few more comments on each of these issues. The world develops thousands of new chemicals each year and continues to use those known to harm man and the environment. The hazards, both acute and chronic, from exposures to chemicals are well known by most of you. As we will discuss later in the presentation, success in controlling chemical exposure concerns will come from many fronts, not the least of which is that referred to as reformulation. Stress, as is defined by many, is the inability to accommodate the challenges one faces, including those at work. From a control perspective, no value is ascribed to the inability to handle the challenges. However, great value is for the ability to determine mechanisms to diminish the stressors and their effects. As noted in the introductory remarks, there is a blurring of exposures to injury and illness from work and non-work activities, perhaps stress being the preeminent example. It is this mental health aspect of work where employers will enjoy great success if they can establish recognition and control techniques. Cumulative trauma disorders will continue to develop and expand in some market segments. This is a common theme in ventures where the tools and equipment from others who have adopted advanced technologies are divesting of their assets. To put it simply, the advancement of technology and tools may benefit one organization, yet perpetuate hazards with the organization who acquires the previously used equipment and tools. In many areas of the world, the true ratio of workers experiencing cumulative trauma disorders is difficult, if not impossible, to assess. Workers experiencing problems are readily replaced in some cultures, while in others, the need to develop income outweighs the ability to report discomfort or injury and receive treatment. Violence in the workplace is proving to be an ever-increasing concern in the United States and abroad. As you may guess, violence is related to the stressors of life and work, another example of the difficulty in separating the two historically distinct aspects of our lives. Recently, violence invaded the relative calm of San Diego State University, where 3 professors were shot and killed by a graduate student in the defense of his thesis. Although the direct association of the thesis defense and the shootings is in question, the stress the student had been experiencing in life and in his graduate work is not. Bloodborne pathogens, whose mechanisms of transmission are clearly understood, continue to raise the need for identification and control of exposures in the workplace. Public service, healthcare, and emergency service workers all live with the need to control exposures to such pathogens as tuberculosis, HIV, and hepatitis B. Here again we can see the direct relationship between the mental aspect of work and the exposure factor. Recently I participated in an incident investigation at a mental health facility where a nurse, after drawing blood from a patient, stuck himself with a needle. Unfortunately, the patient was HIV positive. Although handling it well, the nurse will now have to wait and see if he too becomes infected with the virus which can cause AIDS. Technology will not replace the need to transact some face-to-face business. As organizations become successful in their executives' travel, exposure to kidnap and ransom, or other terrorist-related acts become more likely. These exposures are well known in some parts of the world, and unfortunately are developing in many others. What has just been described are but a few of the exposures that workers and organizations may face. It is clear, however, that these represent a great percentage of the total, when considered from two perspectives. These perspectives are the frequency and severity of injuries and illness. For example, stress and cumulative trauma disorder outcomes will become frequent if not checked, while outcomes from the exposure to blood-borne pathogens, though likely not to be frequent, can and will be severe. The same holds true for both violence in the workplace and the noted kidnap and ransom concerns. These seemingly disparate exposures downgrade businesses in many ways, the common outcome being an impact on productive capability. Nicholas Ashford and Charles Caldart, in their 1991 book, Technology, Law, and the Working Environment, describe 5 factors which shape the conditions and experiences of work. As you might guess, conditions are synonymous in many cases with exposures, while experiences are synonymous with outcomes, both positive and negative. In the case of negative outcomes, we have been referring to these as injuries and illnesses, as well as the cost associated with such events. The 5 factors that are described by Ashford and Caldart include technology, the structure of industry and occupations, the organization of work itself, labor management relations, and workplace health and safety. I believe at this point it is important to say a few more words about technology in the work environment. It is also important to cast technology in a light that we can ultimately use to manage the negative outcomes of exposures. Technology is powerful and ever-changing. The speed of technological change is quickening, and for many this can be energizing and exciting. For others, it is frightening. Consider the working populations for many of the listeners today and their organizations. To initiate rapid change as technologies become available can be disruptive. A living example of this dynamic played out in a San Diego, California bakery just 3 years ago, and the effects of change are just now beginning to balance out. For more than 80 years, this bakery was a fixture in the community, baking bread originally by hand, and then in later years still in a craftsman's style. Most employees had worked at this bakery their entire lives, and second and third generations were represented amongst the workforce. In 1990, a decision was made to build a new bakery, perhaps one of the most modern and technologically advanced in the country. In addition, the decision was made to carry products that had never been part of the bakery staple in the past and to expand. For the sons and grandsons of the original owner, these decisions were seen as progressive and taking advantage of technologies previously not available. The outcomes of these changes were dramatic. In the course of 2 years, the bakery was on the brink of bankruptcy, and the long-standing contracts were lost. Employees who had been at the bakery for their entire lives were either the victims of technology or were consciously searching for new jobs, their trust and desire to work at the bakery destroyed. For those who stayed, they witnessed a deterioration in safety. Injuries increased for 3 consecutive years, and other labor management problems followed. In 1994, the bakery was taken over by a bank and subsequently sold to a multinational baking concern headquartered in Mexico City. The management team has stayed relatively constant over the last 2 years, and improvements have been made. The technologies have not changed, but the recognition of worker importance and their involvement in day-to-day decision-making have. Injury rates have begun to tumble. Market share is returning, and of course the bakery is more viable than it was at the time the decision was made to grow. In fact, at the time of my last visit to the bakery, a couple of the old-timers had returned. At its best, technology can be used to assist those with mobility, vision, hearing, or speaking challenges. Although one of the world's outstanding thinkers and authors, Stephen Hawking's presentations are still sold out, even though he speaks with the aid of a computer voice processor. Technology creates opportunities. At its worst, technology creates new, yet defined hazards or can create unemployment. Elaine Bernard in Technological Change in the Workplace, Health Impacts for Workers, describes a set of positive outcomes for technology and a set of potential negative outcomes. Let's quickly review them. as many of you participating today are probably experiencing them to some degree. A few of the positive attributes of technology include the reduction or elimination of dangerous work, nearly limitless access to information, reduced travel requirements, the advent of computer-based manufacturing systems which, for example, have just played a key role in just-in-time manufacturing, a program which has been presented here at the International Training Center. And lastly, the aforementioned benefits for those with some work-related physical challenges. There are other, even numerous benefits, of course, but let's review some of the potential negative impacts before moving on. The potential downside to advancements in technology include potential unemployment. What has been found to be the case is that the new jobs created by technology advancements are not at the same level as those lost from a pay, reputation, or challenge perspective. Technology has created a whole new world of cottage industries, some of which have built-in safety concerns, but more importantly, we are seeing more and more individuals work at home. On the surface, this may seem to be of value. However, by doing so, we have found the social aspect of work being destroyed. And the hallmark of technological advancements, computers, are being used as watchdogs. Before moving on, I would like to reiterate what are considered to be the 5 elements of technology. This is important as we consider the impacts of technology. We must also consider the use of technology as a way to benefit workers and processes. At the very least, we must be knowledgeable of the facets of technology so that as leaders we recognize how to make a difference in our working or social worlds. Therefore, the elements of technology to consider include the tools used in the course of our activities, the materials which are required to produce goods or support the technology itself, the forms of energy employed to accomplish tasks, the techniques required to perform functions, and finally, how the work itself is organized. By understanding these elements of technology, we have a much better grasp of where the exposures to injury and illness, that is to say, the outcomes, are derived. As well, these elements will provide us a clear view as to where we can insert controls, which reduce the adverse effects to the health and safety of workers. As I conclude these introductory and explanatory remarks, let's briefly summarize the primary elements of our discussion thus far. It will be essential for business, the academic world, and governments to work more closely together and resolve the potential negative outcomes of work. Our approaches to the resolution of the stresses and physical hazards of work, which impact productivity, should be focused to the extent that we understand the etiology, but we recognize the tremendous value of an integrated, holistic approach to improving the health of workers and thus productivity. As suggested by Ashford and Caldart, the factors of condition and experiences at work also provide a framework for exposure resolution. It is recognized that the inclusion of constituents or consumers in change provides innumerable benefits, and that rarely is change a focused issue. Rather, change develops along a continuum, and we will reap production benefits if workers are involved. This was demonstrated in the example I provided concerning the San Diego Bakery. Perhaps to expand the need to recognize the inclusion of constituents and to further recognize that organizational change is seldom swift, let me share with you the experiences of a law firm, a firm who was seeing a skyrocketing increase in the frequency of cumulative trauma disorders, primarily carpal tunnel syndrome, and a related increase in the cost of health care and workers' compensation insurance to care for these injured workers. As a member of a consulting team, my staff and I were trying to assist this law firm in their recognition of the factors which precipitate cumulative trauma disorders, and at the same time we're providing some training for key individuals in the firm's human resources department. After several months, there was no clear indication that our efforts were of benefit, simply due to the cumulative nature of most of the injuries. However, we were provided a unique opportunity when the law firm said they were going to move into larger, more prestigious quarters. What was provided was the opportunity to establish a living laboratory to measure the effect of change. Before moving into the new facilities, the law firm made the commitment to upgrade equipment and furniture. As various departments and employees were taking over their quarters, they were first required to visit a large office on the first floor of the firm's new building. In this office were mock-ups of several workstations, which ranged from partner to associate attorneys and included legal secretaries and clerks' offices as well. Each individual then worked with the Human Resources Department, an interior design consultant, and to some extent my staff, to select the most appropriate equipment and furniture and to orient it properly in their office or workstation. These factors were translated to their new quarters, and over the course of several months, significant improvement was experienced. Dean Spitzer, author of the book Super Motivation, A Blueprint for Energizing Your Organization from Top to Bottom, indicates that one of the best and most successful ways to improve productivity is to simply and honestly communicate with employees or related constituents. He has calculated that up to $6,000 per day can be lost when one or more of the following demotivators are allowed to exist or perpetuate: unfairness, poorly planned work, over-control of workers, the withholding of information, dishonesty and hypocrisy, and lastly, unproductive meetings. The $6,000 lost comes from employees reporting late for work, calling in sick, pocketing office supplies, making mistakes, and yes, becoming injured or ill on the job. As we move through the remainder of the presentation, additional methods of resolving these issues will be highlighted. I believe it is important to point out that a common response to injuries and illnesses on the job, that is to say, those issues which reduce productivity, is the development of regulations or standards. Many employers believe that there are enough standards in existence, and that additional law will only make it more difficult for them to conduct their business. This outcome, of course, has both regional and global considerations. For example, in the United States, the American National Standards Institute is working toward completion of a non-binding standard on the control of upper extremity cumulative trauma disorders. Although it will be recognized and voluntary compliance standard, a jurisdiction such as a state could adopt it and force businesses to comply with its provisions. In response to both cumulative trauma disorders and violence in the workplace, the state of California has passed legislation on workplace security and is soon to issue an ergonomic standard. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, met in September to review the viability of that organization developing an international occupational health and safety management standard. An operative word in their considerations is the development of a management standard, when it is rarely simple to achieve consensus on a singular technical issue. Let's use mental health concerns, and for the purposes